Hi, my lovely book readers. This is Barry Sachs. I want to share with you books that I read in 2021. So a little bit of background. This was the second year that I've done this, where I challenged myself to read 12 books throughout the year, which might sound sort of easy, but that's about one book per month, and when you have a full-time job, it sort of stacks up. So I started this sort of challenge, if you want to call it, as sort of a way to just really enjoy reading. I have so many books, and I really needed to make it a priority to do some more reading, so that's sort of where this came from. I'm going to be sharing with you all the books that I read, and then also some books that I tried to read but just didn't finish for whatever reason. So let's get into it. The first book that I read was called Spellbound by Nora Roberts. If I'm being honest, I don't remember too much about this book because this was the first book that I read. It's like a short romance. I wrote some notes here that has like witches and medieval stuff. I rated it a 6 out of 10. It really wasn't my favorite. It was a short read, so you can see it's rather thin. But at the same time, it just wasn't my favorite. So unfortunately, I sort of started off my year on a little bit of a low note. The second book that I read, which I would highly recommend to anybody of all reading ages and levels, is C.S. Lewis, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. This is just such a well-written book, and it's just amazing. It's really a kid's novel, but I think adults can read it too. It was a fast read for me, and all around amazing. I rated it a 9.5 out of 10. The next book that I read is Playground by 50 Cent. To be honest, when I first picked up this book and started reading it, I didn't exactly know who 50 Cent was, but now I do after doing a little bit of research. So I remember that this had a good story to it. It was about, and I don't remember too much, but it was about a kid that, I don't know, I think he beat someone up or something like that, so he had to attend these therapy sessions, and it sort of took a dive into the life of the main character. So I rated this a 7 out of 10. Personally, it had a lot of like foul language in it, which I just didn't really enjoy. I think I would have enjoyed it a whole lot more if it didn't have that language in it, but overall it was a decent story. The next book is called The Good Son by, I'm probably gonna maybe mispronounce this, but Yu Jeong-jung. I believe it was originally written in Korean. I can't exactly remember, but I know that it was then translated into English. This book was probably one of my top reads for the year of 2021. It was just very emotional and very sort of had a little bit of mystery element to it, and it was like really thought-provoking. So the notes that I wrote on it was that it was a Korean translated mystery / murder. It was very thought-provoking. So 9.5 out of 10 is what I gave it. The next book that I read was Peter and the Starcatchers. This was a decent story. I think I remember, it is rather large, I don't know, 400 pages, 450 pages, so it was a long read. I think I remember enjoying it a lot, but my notes that I have said that it was okay, but it dragged on a bit, so the plot sort of just extended and extended. But other than that, it was a really, really good story. It's sort of a take on Peter Pan, but like a little bit of a twist to it, so it was very good. But it was just a little bit too long for me. So I rated it a 7.5 out of 10. Next one, a lovely little read called The Prince of Wales by R.L. Fisher. I remember when I first picked up this book, I thought this is going to be a little bit of a silly book, and it was. It's a bit childish, but it's really enjoyable, and lots of surprises in it. It's about this whale that really likes to sing, and he sort of gets banished from his town, or whatever you want to call it, underwater, and sort of has to find himself, and yeah, it was a really good read. A little bit childish, but good. I gave it a 9 out of 10. Next book is Pillage by Obert Sky. I've read some other books by Obert Sky, and they're a really, really good author. This one is sort of a teen book about a kid who, like, has these dragons that he hatches, and then he has to destroy them, and there's lots of plot twists in it. Really, really good book. I think it just Some of the things didn't quite hit like I wanted them to, so I gave it a 7.5 out of 10, but it was still interesting and still a fun read. For me, it wouldn't be a year of reading without a book by Janet Ivanovich. So this is Plum Spooky, one of her, it's called an In-Between the Numbers novel. So it's not one of her main series, it's sort of like a side series. This is a really fast read, as are all of her books, or at least I think they're all sort of fast reads. Really good, really silly, really amusing. Just sort of a good book to relax with, and you don't have to take it too seriously. So I give it a 9 out of 10. Good read. Before we move on, I sort of want to show off the books that I attempted to read but just didn't really get through for various reasons. So the first one that I tried to read was called Hello Darkness by Sandra Brown. I think I remember that there was just like too many subjects in this that just weren't my favorite, and so that's why I stopped reading it. Not my favorite. This next one is Failsafe. It was like really militaristic and like very, very dense language, so I read a little bit and then decided that it just wasn't for me. Last but not least, this book called Delicacy. I believe that this was one that was originally written in French and then translated into English. Just wasn't my favorite. It just didn't hit any interest of mine. So these were the books that I started to read but just didn't hit my fancy. Next up, we have Forgotten Country by Catherine Chung. This was a good book. It was about, I think, Korean again. A Korean family that's living in the United States of America, and her father gets sick with cancer, so then eventually they have to move back to Korea. And it's sort of like, has a lot of emotional things in it and a lot of like hard decisions that the main character has to make. It was a little bit difficult to get through at times, sort of just like, why am I reading these certain things, I suppose. Just sort of drug on a little bit, but it was very good and it was very emotional, so I give it an 8 out of 10. Next up, my list is dwindling. The next book is Swing by Kwame Alexander. This was a really, really good book. If you like books that are in like poetry style, poetry format, this book is definitely for you. It had a lot of jazz references, which I really like because I like jazz stuff. It had a really, really good story, so I gave it an 8 out of 10. It was really good. I really enjoyed it. Next up is a book called Angry Management by Chris Crutcher. I think that there's another series that he wrote that this is sort of a spin-off to, so I didn't read that other series, so I think there were some things that were lost a little bit on me with that. This had short stories in it. I think it had 3 or 4 in it. It was a really, really fast read, but unfortunately I found some grammatical errors in it, which, I don't know about you, but when I see grammatical errors or like typo errors in a book, it sort of just makes me cringe a little bit on the inside. So I gave it a 6.5 out of 10 for some of those grammatical errors and typos, and then also it just wasn't my favorite book. Next up, I went back to C.S. Lewis for Prince Caspian. I think I had never seen the movie for this, so this was sort of like, I really didn't know what I was in for with it, but just like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, this was a really, really good book. It's written for kids, but I still enjoyed it as an adult. Wonderfully written, really easy to read, really, really good story. I gave it a 9 out of 10. Third to last, we have a book called Seeley, The Story of a Life. This book is about a young girl named Seeley, and she is Jewish, living throughout the Holocaust. So it was sort of a little bit of an eye-opening story. I have to say it was a little bit confusing at times for me, like to really understand what was happening. It was history fiction of Jew suffrage. So I gave it a 6 out of 10. It was eye-opening to see sort of that perspective, but it didn't quite dive into all of that, and it didn't really explain a lot of the suffrage that was happening, so I found that a little bit confusing, but 6 out of 10. Looks like I went back to another Janet Ivanovich book called Thanksgiving. This was a nice romance book. It was a fast read. It was silly and exciting. I don't remember too much about it other than it was like pretty typical for what Janet Ivanovich puts out. I gave it an 8 out of 10. And last but not least, I finished off the year of 2021 with one of my favorite children's author, Roald Dahl, with Fantastic Mr. Fox, which is a book that I'd never read before, but I really enjoyed it. It was a cute kid's book, you know, it had pictures in it and all of that. It was a very, very fast read compared to some of his other larger works, but it was good. It was an 8 out of 10 for me. So these are all the books that I read in 2021, or there's 3 that I attempted to read and just decided not to. Please let me know if you've read any of these books, if you've enjoyed any of them as much as I have, or if you have different opinions on the books that I've discussed. These bottom 3, probably some of my favorite: The Good Son, Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, and The Prince of Wales. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Bye!